It is a particularly special privilege for me to be here today to have this conversation with Governor Patrick about his book, which is one of those great books. If you haven't bought it, make sure you get it, because it's not only can you read it in a weekend, which is really nice, but you actually get a lot out of it when you're done, and you'll feel really good when you're done, which is also really nice because we read so many things that we don't feel good about when we're done reading. So it's particularly special for me because Deval and I went to school together, and going to Harvard is, at least for me, was hugely intimidating. It was just a horrifying, from the beginning, scary experience. And I met a lot of people there who were brilliant, and a lot of people there who thought they were more brilliant than they were. But you do get to meet a few people who are the real deal. And Governor Deval Patrick is the real deal. There's a reason why he has been an impressive leader, public figure, for as long as he has. So, born on the south side of Chicago, not in a hospital, by the way, a fact I learned from the book, but in his grandmother's house, and incubated in the oven. Went to public schools in Chicago, and then because of a teacher, a caring teacher, got a chance to participate in a program that took him way far from the south side of Chicago to Milton Academy. And just to tell you how intimidated I was at Harvard, I didn't know what boarding schools were when I got to Harvard, and I kept meeting these people who had gone to these schools. And they'd be like, I went to this academy. I'm like, well, what is that? You actually go away from home to go to high school? Ooh, who knew? But Deval did, and he went there and thrived. Was the first to go to college in his family, so not just any college, of course, Harvard College. Graduated from there and spent a year in Africa on a fellowship. Amazing year that you will read the book, and hopefully a little bit today we'll hear about. And then came back, went to Harvard College. So he did that just so he could then be younger than me by a year, because he was only a year younger than me. And then after college, went and clerked for a judge in California, then worked for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in a law firm. And then the rest of his career became hugely public, because you read about him at the Justice Department in the Clinton administration. Then he was selected when Texaco, many of you remember when Texaco, first of all, many remember Texaco. It was a big oil company back in the day.
I know Texaco.
And they had a little itty-bitty problem with how they were handling diversity and diversity issues that caused them to have a huge lawsuit. And as part of that lawsuit, they needed to have a group of people come in and help them manage through those issues. And Deval led that group and did it so well that they asked him to be their general counsel. And from there, he became the general counsel at Coca-Cola. And from there, he went back to Massachusetts and decided to do a little thing called run for governor. Had no political career before that, and everybody said he was crazy, that he couldn't win. That is one of the things about Deval, that had they been in school with him, they would know that's just not the kind of thing you really want to say to him. You can't win, and he proved them wrong. And he's ran in 2006, and then was re-elected again last November, and has had a spectacular career leading Massachusetts, and has become the #1 amazing leader in the country. We are privileged. I'm privileged to have known him for as long as I have. I am excited to talk to him about this amazing book, and I'm really excited that you're going to get a chance to really get to know him a little bit better. And with that, I'd like to introduce Governor Deval Patrick.
You gave away the whole book.
Just the highlights. Just the highlights. I didn't give any of the insights. I want those for you. But the first question, at least for me, is why write the book? Because everybody has their own view about why you wrote the book, so why?
So first of all, Andrea, Andy is how I know you. What are we calling you?
Andy's fine.
Andy.
You heard us.
It's incredibly meaningful to me to be here with you and have you lead this conversation. I have a lot of pals in the audience today, and I hope I get a chance to point out some of them as we go along. Let me say why I didn't write the book, because it's been a fun and fascinating thing to write and talk about this book. But it seems the presumption that if you are a sitting governor and you're writing a book, it's about laying the groundwork for a future campaign or settling political scores. So let me be clear, I'm not running for anything. We do not have term limits in Massachusetts, but this is my last term. I miss the private sector, on payday especially. You know what I mean? But I've enjoyed this run, and in terms of settling political scores, I tend to try to do those in real time instead of in print. I wrote the book because I'm a very hopeful person. I'm an unrepentant idealist, and I've come to appreciate these qualities as strengths. And the book, as much as anything, is a gesture of gratitude to the people who have given me those lessons, who have the teachers, like Darla Weisenberg, who was my 7th grade English teacher and is the person who introduced me to a better chance.
I'd just like to take a minute to say that you look fabulous. If you were his 7th grade teacher, you must have been teaching at age like 5, 6, 7. You were, yeah, so welcome.
I said to Mrs. Weisenberg that she is now the age I thought she was when I was in the 7th grade. There are teachers like Mrs. Weisenberg, like my 3rd grade teacher who came to an event we did last night, and many others who gave me a reason to believe in a brighter future. There were family members and strangers too, who gave me a reason to believe in the power of kindness. There were church ladies on the south side of Chicago who gave me a reason to believe in the essence of faith. Voters who gave me a reason to believe in the politics of conviction. And so the book is about honoring those people and those lessons, and also reminding us that we have it, each of us, within the power to pass those kinds of lessons on to others, and to have that very same kind of impact.
In the book, you talk a lot about, or a little bit, about the challenge of talking to the people in Milton about your life here, and your people here, your family here, about your life in Milton. Can you share a little bit with us about those challenges and how you were, if you were ever able to bridge them at all?
So the South Side in the 50s and 60s, as I experienced it, my mother and sister and I grew up there. I grew up there most of the time on welfare. We lived with our grandparents in a 2-bedroom tenement on 54th and Wabash. I was born in my grandmother's bed, and I was put in a turkey pan that she used at Thanksgiving at the instruction of the doctor in the oven to be kept warm until the doctor could get there. My mother and sister and I shared one of those bedrooms and a set of bunk beds, so you go from the top bunk to the bottom bunk to the floor every 3rd night on the floor. I went to big, broken, crowded, under-resourced in those days, sometimes violent public schools, but we had a real community. Because it was a time when every child was under the jurisdiction of every single adult on the block. Right? Some of you were nodding your heads. If you messed up in front of Ms. Jones, she'd go upside your head as if you were hers. And then call home. Right? So you got it 2 times. And I think what those adults were trying to get across to us, you got it 2 times. I think what they were trying to get across to us was that they had a stake in us, and they expected us to understand that membership in a community is seeing the stake that we have in each other. So when I got the chance in 1970 to go to Milton Academy through this program called A Better Chance, for me, that was like landing on a different planet, right? I mean, you said you didn't know what a boarding school was when you got to college. I didn't know what it was 4 years before. I saw it the first time the night before was 14 years old. I went out there by myself. They had a dress code in those days. The boys wore jackets and ties to classes. And I write in the book about how, when the clothing list arrived at home, my grandparents splurged on a jacket for class. But a jacket on the south side of Chicago was a windbreaker. Or at least it was then. So the first day of class, all the other boys were putting on their blue blazers and their tweed coats, and I had my windbreaker. I have figured it out, but I want you all to know. But I think that for us then, what I experienced, to your specific question, was that it felt like the price of admission to the one world was rejecting the other. So when I came home on my first visit home, I remember, everybody was all excited. My grandparents and my sister and I were talking in the front hall. And my sister interrupted and said, "Ooh," she said, "he talks like a white boy." I was devastated. And my grandmother shot back, "He speaks like an educated boy," and saved the day. But in both those worlds, it felt like, my friends at home, their eyes would glaze over when I was trying to describe what my experience was like at Milton Academy. And at Milton Academy, they wanted to hear about how quickly and smoothly I was making them feel comfortable with my integration in that community. And I think over time, I came to realize that's a false choice.
So, how did you, I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling of disconnect. How do you bridge it? You just didn't choose to, or you accepted it and helped people to accept you, or some other choice option?
Andy, I think my way of managing this was to figure out who and what I was about, who I am, what I'm about, and then to be that all the time, everywhere, all the time. And that had to do with a couple things that I write about in the book, including knowing that wanting my choices not just to be between those two worlds, but the whole world. Leo Webster, who's here, and I were in grammar school together. And we had this amazing 6th grade teacher named Eddie Quaintance, Mrs. Quaintance. And, we were 35, 40 kids in the classroom. We were a mess. Our homes were a mess. The neighborhood was kind of a mess. She taught us to count and say greetings in German. She took us to the first opera I'd ever seen. She took us to the lyric opera. I had no idea what they were singing about. I still don't know what they sang about.
Thank God for subtitles.
Yes, but I love it. Right? She took us to a new movie that was out at the time called The Sound of Music. And she used it to teach us about the rise of the Nazis in the Second World War. She's the first person who I can think of who helped me imagine what it would be like to be a citizen of the whole world. And I wanted that, and I read about that.
Well, I have some more questions that would veer off the book, so I'm going to not ask you, because one of the things that immediately comes to mind is when you come back from Milton and your sister says you talk like a white boy. It's that whole thing our kids are facing right now about not wanting to be educated. That education is not a good thing. I know you could wax on that topic for a while, but you don't in the book, so I'm going to not ask you that question. We'll save it. But I do think that it's just fascinating.
I'll be back with the second book.
Exactly. Yeah, before the second book, just come back and talk to us. But I also noticed that you sort of skipped over your Harvard years, and I was just wondering, is it something we said, or is it the next, you're saving Harvard years for the next book? But you touch on it. You mentioned that you were there, you blazed through, but you really...
Yeah, I was there.
Sure.
It's interesting. The book is not exactly an autobiography. It really is a book of lessons, and they are mostly built on life experiences, not entirely, and they come from particular episodes. So it's not a blow by blow. I did. Any of you watched The Daily Show with Jon Stewart?
Yes.
So I was on Jon Stewart last week. I was scared to death. Because he is, as we say at home in Massachusetts, my new home, he is wicked smart. And really, really quick. And during the interview, he held up the book and he said, "Will it get bigger when it gets older?" Kind of an irritating thing to say. It took about 15 years to write this book. There's another book which is more point by point, and I think more about politics and policy. This really isn't that. I loved it. I had a wonderful experience, and but I think that some of the bigger lessons I'm trying to get at, I learned before and after that time.
Okay, we'll look for the bigger, older book. Let's talk about Africa a little bit. You had fabulous time there. The descriptions of your time there are really, they don't really make you want to go, but they are, it's really fascinating. But the thing that struck me most about it was the loneliness you talked about, and how lonely you were, and how hard that was. I'd just like for you to just talk a little bit about that, and then how that impacted you, managing through that loneliness, and just share a little bit with you how you got through that, because you were still shockingly young then.
Well, I had just graduated. It was 1978, and I had a fellowship that called the Michael Clark Rockefeller Fellowship. It was granted to a couple of graduating seniors, and the requirement was that you spend a year in a distinctly non-Western culture. And they gave you just enough money to get there and to get home, so that you would not be tempted to go move into the local intercontinental hotel. And I wanted to go and spend some time in Africa. I'd never traveled abroad before. I wrote to everybody I knew who knew somebody in Africa. I got one reply from one guy on a project in Sudan, and he said, "Come. And I'm not sure what you'll do, but we'll figure it out." And so I landed on the continent in Cairo. It was a good time to be an American in that part of the world, because while I was there, Sadat came home from Camp David, so it was a very exuberant time. I hitchhiked I taught myself the greetings and the numbers, sort of following the Mrs. Clinton's model, on the plane from Athens. And then I hitchhiked from Cairo to Khartoum. It took about 2 weeks. Some of it on foot, some of it by train, some of it on camel, on boat, barge. The last week of which without a bath, so I looked like a piece of the desert I'd just come through. I found my way to the office of the man I've been writing to for 6 months or so, and learned as I write the book that he had left the week before for 2 years in Long Beach, California, and had said nothing to his office about my coming or what I was supposed to do. So I had to talk my way onto this project, and basically to get rid of him, because I was a nuisance, and also a young man who just graduated from the University of Khartoum, about my age, who was assigned by the government to this project to get rid of us. He told us to go out to Darfur, which is out by the Chad border. Some of you have read about Darfur. It was a very different place then than it is today. But to get there, as I write the book, the only way to get there was to go to the local marketplace, find a market lorry, a truck that was going in your direction, and then buy space on top of the cargo. There was no train, no plane, and by the way, no roads outside of the city of Khartoum. So it's about the distance from here to Cleveland, maybe. It's a 5-day trip through tracks through the sand. So you bring enough food and water, and off you go. First day and a half out, we went into a skid. The truck flipped over.
This is the part where it doesn't make you want to go.
A couple people with broken bones, cargoes all over the place. And we were stranded out there for 3 days before 120 degrees, before there was any sign of anybody. Then eventually a truck came correction, back to Khartoum, and we put the people who were hurt, and me, because I was the guest, and that's a part of the culture, sent us back to Khartoum, and we started all over again, and then eventually got out to El Fasher. And I spent several months out there. No mail, no phone service, no fax. Email wasn't invented, no texting or any of that. No contact at all and with my family or with home. If my children tried this today, I would kill them. It was incredibly isolating in many ways because there was no contact with anything I knew or anyone I knew. And until I got a grasp of the language enough to be conversational, you just feel by yourself. Yet, it was one of the most empowering things I ever did. And I think we made a difference in the project. I think it also had a lot to do with my sense that I could take some risks and overcome.
It is impossible to imagine a trip like that today. As you said, you'd kill your kids. You can't even imagine doing it. But clearly it impacted you in profound ways. It just talk with you for just a little bit about when you got back and you found out your mother was coming. Because it's just a great story. I think people would like to hear because after being out there for days and missing your family, you found out you might get to see one of them.
Yeah, for months. So I got back shortly before Christmas. And all the mail was being collected at the post restant at the main post office. And I went down to check. I was so excited about checking for the mail. And I got there and they had bags of mail. It was so exciting. And so I gathered up all this stuff and I went back to the little place I was staying in Khartoum, and I put it all in order by postmark. And I just read, it took me a couple of days to get through it all. And you read about somebody broke up with this one, everything was terrible, and then you read on, and everything was fine again. Then you met somebody else. It's a wonderful lesson. It really is. In the ebb and flow of life, how just you let a little time pass, things work out. I got to a letter from my mother, which she had sent about 6 weeks before. And it said, "Meet me in Nairobi for Christmas." She was traveling on such and such a date, and that date was maybe 3 or 4 days, maybe less, from when I was reading this letter. Now there was, in order to make a phone call, but the reason to make the phone call, by the way, as I write in the book, is that's all the letter said. Not what airline I'm flying on, or what flight, not where I'm staying, just meet me in Nairobi for Christmas. You had to make a reservation at the downtown headquarters of the Sudanese phone company in order to make a long distance call. And then if you got the reservation, which took weeks in advance to get, you'd get cut off in the middle of the call. So that was impossible. Again, no fax. There was no way to check the information. It just said, meet me in Nairobi on such and such a day. So, or she was traveling on such and such a day. So I hustled down to Nairobi, which involved basically hitchhiking on a British Airways flight. I don't actually want to get into it. But,
we don't want to talk about the guy that got left on the tarmac because you got on the plane.
Not by name, anyhow. So I got to Nairobi the evening before the day she said she was traveling. And I met every international arrival for a day and a half. They would come, and then they would come, and you have this, I described in this book, this incredible rise and fall of emotions. You're furious, and then excited, she might come out, and then mad when she does, and the temperature's changing, and finally she walked out. I think I've been waiting maybe 40 hours at this point. And she looked at me, and she had never traveled outside the country either. She looked at me and she said, "I wasn't sure you'd be here." We had a marvelous time.
You lot in the book about love and how love can transform lives and build bridges, even when it's tested. And